My name's Zoey, and this is my story. So I guess the best way to start this is from the very beginning. And had a really good, loving, upcoming childhood. Uh, Very loving grandparents. My mom was very loving. My dad disciplined me. Great dad. And when the aluminum plant here in the Dow shut down, he decided that he was going to go find work, and travel the country. And we were supposed to follow, which we never did. And which really, I held a resentment towards my dad for leaving. And so I stuck with my mom, and she ended up remarrying. The guy that she remarried, didn't really know how to deal with the child. I was about 11 at the time, and he definitely made sure that I knew that I was retarded and dumb, which it's all right. He just didn't know how to handle a child. And but as time went on, my mom, she deals with depression, so she slept quite a bit, and so I was really on my own. I had a lot of cousins and things like that, so I had family, so I guess I wasn't really too much alone. But at the same time, I didn't really have too much of a role model. I had my older brother, but he was a kid, and we had different moms. But as I got a little older, my mom ended up relapsing on meth, and at that time, she was real depressed, sleeping all the time. Until she wasn't sleeping, but then she was never home. So she left me with the guy that didn't necessarily want me to be there. And so, like I said, I was all by myself. And as time went on, she ends up going to rehab because she needed to. But I ended up moving out to my dad's out in California at the time where he was at. And, it was good down there for a little bit, of course. But, being a mama's boy, I decided to come on home. And he was pretty upset about that. I wish I would have stayed there, but as a kid, whatever. Hit the age 13, and that's when I really started experimenting with drugs and alcohol. My 13th birthday is when my mom decided that it was time that I could start smoking some weed. And for my 13th birthday, just got real stoned and hanging, which was kind of weird with my mom, but my brother was in college, so I spent some time with him, and I'd just go over there and smoke some weed and get drunk. And, at that time, it didn't really seem like it was that big of a deal. But as time went on, I was in sports. I just ended up becoming, a teen that was a little pothead. And I liked to drink. I'd skip school, go steal cans out of people's yards, go turn them in, go buy, get someone to buy some alcohol, get some weed. And that's how it basically was growing up through high school. And when I was in high school, I always wanted to try every single drug. And me and my buddy, were best friends. His name was Alex. And that's what we did. We did drugs. We tried them all. We just wanted to stay away from meth and heroin. And we knew that was, something bad. They always say stay away from the white drugs. So we tried all the psychedelics. I can't think of anything that I haven't really tried. I haven't tried PCP. I haven't really seen that. But so as time went on, I experimented with drugs. I played sports, a lot of baseball. Had a good, like I said, a good upcoming. I had a good time in school. A lot of friends. Nothing real negative. I grew up, and my grandparents and my mom, they made sure that I knew who God was. Who my personal belief and my own understanding is Jesus Christ, and so that's how I grew up. And as time goes on, I started, getting in trouble a little bit. Started selling weed, and trying to support my habit, and ended up getting arrested and catching delivery charges and possession of over an ounce of marijuana when it was illegal at the time. And I get put into drug court. They're trying to help me, get these felonies off my record because I was trying to join the Navy, and they weren't accepting anybody that was a felon. And of course, being immature and dumb, I couldn't stop smoking weed. And made it to the third phase until they decided to revoke me and put me in jail for a little while. And but just like I said, just being immature and dumb. But so as I was in drug court, I met some people that everybody kind of gave me some shit for being in there for weed, but just being a kid. But that's when I started being introduced to the harder stuff, meth and heroin, because that's when I started getting curious, when I got to know everybody that was, when they were doing those type of things. And I was talking about selling weed, and they were talking about selling harder drugs and how much more money you can really make. And, that caught my eye. And when I was 18, I ended up, using meth, and with a really good friend of mine, or working. And then next thing you know, I'm just buying meth and doing it. Next thing you know, I'm selling it, get you introduced to, a plug, and she knew everybody, so she's introducing me to everybody, and it was, it was a really good time. Like for what it was, I personally had a good time, and until I didn't, because it catches up real fast. Going from 220 pounds and being a stoner to 145 pounds in less than a year, and next thing you know, I'm selling meth, I'm selling heroin. I start using heroin so I can go to sleep, and I start kicking weed away and get my house raided, and it was just a complete mess. And as I was in there, being the junkie I was, I convinced my older brother to bail me out, and he bails me out. So I run straight back to the drugs, don't keep my promises to him, and end up ruining the bail and going on the run, committing Berg ones. Cops are after me, just so not only just selling drugs and using drugs, ended up developing the habit of stealing and being a thief, and just destroying everything in my path. Destroying all the bridges. None of my family trusted me, and just tweaked out little Zoey, and just going around, and as time goes on, in and out of jail, just doing my thing, and then I thought I would take it to a next level and really get into some bigger crimes, other than Berg ones. I was starting to rob people, I was stealing from family, I was going out driving around looking for things to steal, carrying around guns, getting into just the whole shebang, what the game really brings, and nothing but hate and just nothing good. There's God isn't in there, and I knew who God was at the time, and I tried my best to absolutely shut the door, but he kept his foot in the door, and he wasn't letting that happen. And his grace is something else. But it's like I said, as time goes on, I keep using drugs. My grandma wasn't letting me go, and every time I'd have a warrant, I'd just run over to Washington because it was non-extraditable, and she would just hide me out. God bless her heart. Just being grandma. Making sure that I took a shower, had my vitamins, and was eating a sandwich. She was barricading the door before I would, if I would come home, and she would make sure that I had a sandwich. And I really miss her. But as time went on, going in and out of jail, I ended up going to the Salvation Army inpatient treatment out there in Portland when I was out there, and I had a great experience. I really sought God there. When I was in jail before I went there, somebody that came in to bring the word in, really convinced me that God was real, and that's when I had that aha moment. Went inside my unit, and I just started, weeping and crying, and a buddy came up to me and he's like, what's wrong? I'm like, God's real, man. And that's when I knew that I was like, I got to let this go, and it's time to go back to my family. That's all they really want, is just me to come home. And so I ended up going to inpatient treatment. Only was there for 3 months. It's a 6 month to a year long program. Made it for 3 months. Had an amazing experience, but I still left. And I went home. And I just remember seeing the looks on my grandma's eyes, when she saw me, and she just could not believe that I was home. She was so upset. And I promised her I would not go get high, and she had to take off at the time. And she, that power of addiction. She made my hand. She had me put my hand on the Bible and promised that I would not go get high, and that's exactly what I did. And as soon as she left, I went directly down the street and went and got high, believe it or not. And that's something that I think about often. And of course, straight back to relapse, got back with the woman I was with, and just fell straight back into my addiction immediately. And I don't know how many times I've done that, just over and over, just finding God, gonna get high, finding God, gonna go get high, and just knowing that He's real. And it just didn't matter, because it's just, I think that the reason why I wanted to go get high so much is because I loved that feeling of people needing me, because I had the drugs. And when people are sick and they need heroin or downers or anything, they hit me up. And so it's just go into all these different places. And it's next thing you know, back in and out of jail. And after I relapsed, my PO convinced me a program called Bridges of Change showed up. And a buddy of mine named Mike, he was running it, and they agreed to let me come into that house. And it's not faith-based, but it could bring the Spirit anywhere you go. And it was a great program. I ended up graduating the program, getting off probation for the first time in like years, and entering the 12-step program, because that's what they wanted. They wanted you to hit a certain amount of meetings, or faith groups. I think it was 3 meetings a week, and it had a good group of guys there. We all held each other accountable and spoke life into each other, tried to lift each other up no matter what the situation was. When we just saw somebody struggling, we were there for them. So it was a great program. Graduated, ended up moving out, me and a buddy that they thought was a good fit. We moved out to Mosier, and we were there for a good while. And of course, got with a woman that was, I didn't get with her, I shouldn't say that. There was a woman that I liked a lot, and she was sober in the program also. And she just wasn't really that into me, and it kind of broke my heart. And so next thing you know, being that immature boy, is just go out and relapse. That's what we do, and go out and relapse. And my buddy that was living with me, he was ready to move out. And then after I relapsed, he was definitely ready to move out. So he ended up moving out. So what do I need to do? I need to be able to pay for the rent and take care of the house. So I move in my girlfriend at the time, and when she ended up showing up for the first time, I remember she gave me a shot of heroin, and I woke up to her wrapping her legs around me and holding me, rocking back and forth. And I just saw her, she was just bawling her eyes out because she thought I had OD. She said I turned pale white and my lips were blue. And I came to, and she's just rocking back and forth. And it was, you think that would be an eye opener, but it wasn't. It was just like, wow, I'm pretty loaded right now. When you're loaded, you don't really care. Let's go get high again. And so I ended up moving in somebody else. I'm trying to pay the rent. I'm peddling small bags, and it was pretty wild. I'm living out there in Mosier. Just about to lose my house. I lost my vehicles. I'm not really able to pay my rent. I knew that was short, and it was like the act of the devil, man. Like there was this dude that ended up showing up in Mosier, this small little town. And I remember a good friend of mine went up to like where the caves were, or not the caves, the tunnels were, and he was gonna go shoot his pistol, and there was this car parked there, and he meets this dude there that was just posted up, and he was obviously getting high, and they ended up talking, and my friend that calls me, he's like, hey, you want to buy a certain amount of drugs? And it's like, oh yeah, sure. And he was acting like he was bringing his friend over, but I didn't know he just had met him. And he comes over, and it was this this dude and this chick, and he sells me the drugs, and I asked him, can you sell this amount? And he just looks at me like, yeah, I can sell that amount. And so I call another buddy of mine, and he comes over, and we do the deal, and end up getting dude's information, and end up finding out, he's quite the plug, going down to California back and forth, and pulls out his backpack out of the trunk and comes in, and he's just got a huge, large amounts of drugs. And when my friend asked him for his number, he said, no, you can talk to Zoey. And as he left, and I didn't think I would ever see him again. And I'd say a couple of weeks later, he hits me up and asked me if I can send him some cash. He wanted $500 to wire him some cash, and I'm like, I can't really afford that, but I will, I'll chance it, because he promised that he would be at my house. And so I wire him the money, and which was crazy to think about now. I would never send $500 to anybody. And it took 3 days, didn't hear nothing from him, and then he's knocking on my door, and he hands me a large amount of drugs and says, let's see what you can do. And he's taking off, then he'll be back in a few days. And I had that sold basically immediately. Next thing you know, he's moving into my house, and as my habit gets worse and worse, I'm making trips down to California with him, and he's living with me. It was a great time. My heroin habit between me and my girl we're probably slamming close to probably around a ball every other, every few days. And we ended up, I had a really bad gambling addiction. It seems like gambling addiction is every single drug dealer's downfall. And it was my downfall. It was my plug's downfall. I ended up, shitting away all the rent, losing the house, lost everything, went from having a nice house, multiple cars, 2 jobs, relationship with God, to absolutely nothing, just being absolutely down in the dumps, hating my life. It was just me and my girl, and we ended up coming across a trailer. A fixer-upper, And so what do we do? We get it towed and put it outside of Mom's trailer. It was just a complete shithole. And we move in there, and I'm, as you can imagine, having the time of my life, just loaded and remodeling this trailer. I don't know how long it took. I mean, going to all the stores, stealing all the supplies, just doing everything that, tweakers, drug addicts do. We like to boost, and it just got worse and worse. And, that gambling addiction never went away. And, I do my absolute best to double my money. And every time I doubled my money, I just went straight back into the machine. My theft habit got really bad. I was sitting outside of businesses and scoping them out for weeks at a time. Seeing what their schedule was, what I could do, what I could get away with, and so I ended up going on a crime spree after my girlfriend at the time. She was basically like my rock. She ends up going to jail because she had a warrant. We were leaving Sherry's at the time when we got pulled over, and they took her in. I don't know, it was right when it closed down, or it shut down at like 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever. And they kicked us all out, and they take her in. So I ended up losing it, because every time that I would slam meth, it just turns me into a devil. It's the exact opposite of what I am, and I think that I'm absolutely a Superman, and I can get away with anything. It doesn't matter. Nothing mattered. And we just went to jail. I didn't have any money to put on her books. It just wasn't the plug anymore. I'm being that guy that's asking everybody to get them high. And as you can imagine, going from having all the drugs you could want to having absolutely nothing was terrible. I was always sick. Just a little bit of heroin wasn't getting me far. So I told everybody when I did my first shot of heroin, everybody was warning me, don't do that. I was like, I'm either going to have 20 grand in my pocket, or I'm going to go to prison. And I remember saying that, and I ended up going to prison. I racked up 16 felonies in 3 counties, and a lot of guns were involved, a lot of theft, and I got sat in jail for 7 months, and I did my absolute best to fight it, but I was completely guilty. There was no doubt about it. And so I'm sitting in there, but like I had that relationship with God, so that idea of going to prison wasn't necessarily a bad idea to me. Like I wasn't against it, and I was like, well, this is the time for me to get sober. And I had a really good friend, Victor Velez. He was a part of the Bridges Change, and he gave him the opportunity to come in and talk to me behind the glass. And he came and visited me and lifted up my spirits. Bringing the Holy Spirit every time he came in. Once to twice a week, just to say hello and seeing exactly how I was doing. And it was exactly what I needed in the 7 months. And so the idea of going to prison wasn't super upset about it. I'll go in there and try to make a difference in other people's lives and in my life. And ended up signing the deal for 36 months over here with 3 years of probation, and I ended up getting 51 months over there in Washington, and they ran concurrent. So they ended up sending me out, and prison, surprisingly, I had way too good of a time in prison. It was, I got over into Oregon, I sought God, met, some great people, and, my heart was getting softer, and surprisingly, when I was in prison, and I was reading the 12-step books and reading my Bible and reading as much literature as I possibly could, trying to better my situation for the time being. Washington ended up coming to get me and taking me over straight to Walla Walla, because that's when COVID was happening, and they did my intake over there, and I sat in the hole for a good time, about 3 months. And I sought God in there, because when you're in isolation, it's the perfect time to talk to God and get to know him. And as they let me out to the general population, they did my intake there. It's from Oregon to Washington, it's a whole nother world. As soon as I got over to Walla Walla, it was it was really something, because they weren't doing a room inspection. They weren't coming in the cells to do inspections. So as soon as I walk through, all you hear is zzz, and it's open bars, and people are getting tattooed, and people are smoking spice and doing drugs, and there was really just a party scene. So as you can imagine, I thought I let the drugs go, but I started partying immediately, and I had way too good of a time. When I walked into my cell, it was just, they were cooking bashes in there, a pruno, and there was orange peels everywhere, and they just didn't care because of COVID, and they just weren't really doing anything. And if you caught an infraction, they weren't shipping you over because of COVID. So it was pretty wild. And as you can imagine, as time went through, I get in some trouble, got transferred over to the medium, and I had a cellie over there that he was an extreme drug addict, and he had all kinds of money on the out. So believe it or not, I don't know how, but the grace of God, I don't have any type of blood pathogens, because we shared the same needle for 6 months. Just sharpening it over and over and over, where, the Suboxone was huge in there, you could get, the whole thing. So my habit was back, and as soon as I got out of prison, I was ready to go out and start using it, doing exactly what I was doing. I put God aside again and wanted to do exactly what I wanted to do, and ended up moving in with my aunt over here in Oregon, because when you do property crimes over there in Washington, you don't have to do any type of probation. So I came over here, was sober for a little bit, I guess, and then that's when fentanyl was a thing. Ended up being a thing when I got out. It wasn't a thing really when I went in. And I remember meeting with a buddy, because I'm cross-eyed, believe it or not, from a heroin detox. These glasses have prisms in them, and you can't really tell, but I see two of you right now, and they get worse and worse the farther I look away. So the same thing happened to my buddy. He did a shot of heroin, and his eye went straight. So after all that time in prison, I was just like, let's see what happens. And with the whole, it was crazy, because everybody would give me shit when I was in there. Like, I'd do Suboxone, and my eye would go straight. Did a shot of heroin, and didn't fix it completely. And then my buddy gave me some fentanyl, and it went completely straight. It was completely wild. I could see one again, so my habit just skyrocketed. And I remember I was living with my aunt, and I remember my buddy gave me the fentanyl pill, and he said, just be really careful. You can really OD easily on this. And I hadn't seen my brother yet, and he was coming from Gresham. We were going to go play some disc golf, and I ran downstairs as soon as he said he was on his way, because I just wanted to go take one hit. And I took one hit, and I woke up to him knocking on the door upstairs, and I was laying on a glass lamp, passed out. By the grace of God, I don't know how I came to, but it's really something. Like, it was embarrassing. I was loaded, and my brother knew, and it's, as you can imagine, my habit just got worse and worse. I started, just using meth more, and I fell in love with fentanyl, and it was cheap, and it's the devil's drug is really what it is. And as time went on, my aunt kicks me out. She puts a restraining order on me. I'm just causing a ruckus, doing my thing, and go back to jail, lose my job, and I get put back in the Bridges of Change house, and decided I was going to get sober there, and I got put on the Suboxone program, where they gave me the shot, which was very helpful. And if you're into it, don't let it be a supplement for your drug. Use it for what it is and get off of it as soon as you can. Because a lot of people just keep using. And I got the shot, because once you get the shot, there's no going back. And I did that for 4 months, and I started going back up to church and just doing everything I possibly could. I started repairing my relationships with God. When I was in the Oregon prison, right, I ended up finding out that my grandma had cancer, and she was really my rock. She was everything. She constantly spoke life into me, and then when I found out she had cancer, I was on the phone constantly trying to speak life into her and declaring that she was going to be healed, and there was nothing that she wasn't going to pass or anything. But she knew, because it was such an aggressive cancer, that she was going to end up passing. Just trying to declare it. And every time I talked to her on the phone, it just got harder and harder every day, because I'd just be in the yard just bawling my eyes out. And of course, all my friends were coming up and trying to tell me, encourage me and lift me up. But it's not what I wanted. I wanted to be out there with Grandma, on her dying breath, and I didn't get that opportunity. She passed in 6 months. So I ended up having 2 dreams after my grandma passed. And so my first dream was my grandma, right? She was looking in a direction, and her eyes were just completely big. And I just kept, I wanted to get her attention. I just kept saying, "Grandma, Grandma, Grandma," and she just wouldn't look at me, and her eyes were big, and she just kept saying, "Wow, wow, wow." And I just remember waking up and just feeling comforted. I knew that exactly where she was. She's been speaking truth in my life the entire time, and I just witnessed it. So my second dream was, I was laying down and I couldn't move. I remember it was like a white screen almost. It was just me laying there, and I saw this albino lioness start walking up towards me, and I was so scared, but I was sobbing because of my grandma. And this lion just kept walking up to me, and as you can imagine, a lion walking up to you, can be, you're scared. And it comes up closer and closer, and I'm sitting there just like startled, and I couldn't move, and it just looks at me and then lays down and put his head on my chest. And I believe it was the Holy Spirit comforting me. And I just woke up, and it was it was really something. And oh man, and as time, I woke up, and I was just like, wow. And even having all those experiences, and I still, try to shut the doors, and still went high, and it's that power of addiction. And the reason why I strongly believe that all this addiction, all that stuff started happening, is because when I got into the 12-step program, and at an early age, I didn't work the steps. I didn't want to sponsor. didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to hit the meetings, get my meeting slip signed, and out of there. I just didn't really care a whole lot. It was just I had my relationship with God, and I thought that was enough. And because through these steps we have a spiritual awakening, but I had that awakening from a young age, but it didn't really have the support from my friends that I have today. And as you can imagine, after I got out of the Bridges of Change house, relapsed and did my thing, and finally, I finally met the right one, and it was really, she's really something. She's exactly what I needed in a woman, and we were really there for each other. And I decided today, I was gonna start hitting these meetings without needing to have the slip signed, and actually enjoying it, and working these steps and getting the sponsors that I can relate to. And he took me through the steps, and he was very patient with me. We did it the native way. Ended up doing my 4 steps. It was obvious, the first 3 steps, I had my God, and it was obvious that life was unmanageable, going in and out of jail, and just, for over 10 years in and off, off probation. And it was when things really changed, it was when I actually started listening, to people, that have some time under their belt and doing what is suggested, and reading the 12 and 12, or the 12 step. And it really changes your life when you actually do the step work, making the amends and righting all the wrongs that you've done. I stole from family, and just being a thief, and burnt all my bridges, and all my family wanted when I made the amends was when they literally said, is that it? 'Cause, I stole jewelry from my mom, my grandma, everything, just, some real dirtbag shit. And all they said was, we don't care. We just want you to come home and get sober. Like, just be home, come home. Man. It's, that love from your family is it's really something, when you have that support, and, having your higher power of your own understanding, and just pushing into the step work, and doing what is suggested, because it's there for a reason. And through my history, it's proven that you can have a relationship with God, but if you're not hitting those rooms, you're not doing the step work, then you're just dry. You ain't doing nothing. Just renew your mind, and soften your heart, and help one another, because when you make that list and you actually make the amends, and it's an everyday type of thing. You're writing, taking inventory. You have to take inventory every single day, and admit when you're wrong, and just watch what happens. Just watch what your higher power will do for you when you're willing to admit that you're in the wrong. You're immature, or I was immature, and it's just crazy what happens when you do what is suggested. And that's why the people that have 30 years, because they stick in their rooms and they help the newcomer. And that's something that I learned the hard way. And I highly encourage every single person to do the step work, and be willing to sponsor other people, because that's really when your whole world just completely changes. Because if your life is nothing but all you want to do is just help somebody else, then it's not necessarily all about you. You can let go of all the things that really bothered you inside. That's the reason why the step works is there. And my sponsor ended up taking me through like I said, the native way. We did it in the sweat, and I came out new, and it was an amazing experience. Shout out to you. I really appreciate it. Taking me through those step works, and it was really something. As time kept going on, as our relationship got stronger with God, and I couldn't ask for a better life than I have right now. I have a great job. I'm able to give back. I work down at the annex, and people are coming in that are struggling with drug addiction or whatever they may be dealing with. It's just a great opportunity to just give back and just share my my strength and hope and my faith and whatever they're willing to hear. And it's really something. Like I said, do the step work and watch what happens. Your family forgives you. Your friends are wanting to be your friends again, and every single person that you're using drugs with looks up to you now, and then like they see that you can do it, they can do it. Because, man, like I said, I was a junkie for about 10 years. Just in and out, being a thief, and just the scum of the scums. It's just basically was homeless. After a while, I've slept in sheds before, couch surfing. Just anything where anybody would let me come crash on their couch, and it was just to get high. But for what? What's the point of getting high, or running back to any of that stuff? It's terrible. It's nothing. It's nothing but something that's willing to destroy your life. It covers up the hurt and everything, but that's the reason why the step work's there, so we can get past all the nonsense. But like I say, I gotta now. I have a great relationship with my higher power. I have great friends. After I graduated Bridge Change House this last time, I ended up going over to a house over there in Murdoch. A lot of people know who she is. Great house, and she's not going to let you live there without doing step work, right? And she really opened my eyes and my heart, to what it really looks like, and to not really sweat the small shit, and just know that life's really is an amazing thing, and it's a gift from God, and we have the opportunity to help one another, and that's really what we're here for, is to have that relationship with our higher power of our own understanding, and to help one another. And there's nothing more greater than that, and then watch the happiness that comes with that. It's something. So, like I said, do the step work, help one another. When you do the step work, do it thoroughly, so you don't have any bondage or anything like that, and just admit when you're wrong, and just be able to move forward and grow through it, and live in that 12 and 12, and just soak in exactly what it's written, because it's all truth, and it's a tool to set us free from the addictions and all just the BS when we grew up and got through. Because making those amends and forgiving the people that hurt us is everything. It's key. It's what we need. And so it's we stay there for a while, and at the house over there in Murdoch, I ended up joining the laborers union. I had a great job, and was there for a little bit over a year as a concrete hand. I was pouring concrete. It was just what sobriety had to offer. It was just something amazing. I had a career. And then I went on a trip to the Grand Canyon, where I hiked rim to rim with my cousin and my uncle, and we got into a really bad car accident, and I ended up getting hurt. But by the grace of God, we both made it, and it was a really bad car accident. We both had traumatic brain injuries. My cousin had a broken pelvis, had a broken hip. I got pretty banged up. But by the grace of God, even all the medications that they prescribe, which I still have, I still suffer from some sciatic issues, but it's through the program, I don't have to run back to the old life. I know what I'm worth, I know my identity and what I have to offer, and it's just giving back. It doesn't matter where we are or anything like that. The program offers so much, and we can find comfort in the program when we all do what is suggested. Just talking to other people. Every single person in those rooms have dealt with the same shit we've dealt with, if not more. So it's always boo-hoo me, boo-hoo that, but we're all dealing with the same shit, and we're there to lift each other up. So we wholeheartedly just dive in and watch what happens. I have life's so great, and it's such a gift. I have my wife and I, we got married, and we have a kid on the way, and I'm so excited to be a sober dad. The generational curse stops with me and my family, and we're going to raise an amazing son. She's due right now, and I cannot wait. And through the 12-step program changed my life, absolutely. Like I said, you have to take the steps seriously, very thoroughly. Make the amends. Even when you don't want to, make the amends and forgive. We have to forgive. We have to let go of the things that are holding us down. And just know that no matter what, going back out to use is never the answer. We have to live 24 hours at a time, day by day, and just watch what happens with how good God is and what this program really has to offer. And that's my story.